Welcome to today's Wine Club. I am Chris Wofford.
And I'm Cheryl Stanley.
On today's pod, Cheryl and I will pop some corks and explore some of her favorite, lesser-known but secretly stunning wines. Cheryl is an international wine expert and senior lecturer at Cornell's Nolan School of Hotel Administration and a favorite guest here at Cornell's Keynote. It's great to have you again.
Thank you, Chris. I'm so excited for today.
I can't wait. This is number 3 in our wine series. At some point, we'll share the URLs to the 2 previous events where we covered natural wines, and then we covered some of the technicalities around appellations, geographical regions, and some of the specifics as far as understanding where wines come from. But today, we're going to talk about some lesser-known wines that are secretly stunning. So we'll be hopefully introducing people to some new tastes and flavors and experiences. So I will say that before we get started here, these wines are not readily available at most wine stores. Certainly at our local here in Ithaca, we're a relatively small city. We're 50,000 people or so. And these are just not available. They don't tend to, they don't have broad appeal. Let's put it that way. And they maybe have yet to be famous. Maybe these are cult wines. Cheryl, why are we drinking these? And what are your thoughts on these?
Well, I think, one thing could be they're not familiar with the grape variety.
Yep.
If it's listed on a label, someone says, "Oh, I don't know what that is," so they don't feel comfortable buying it. Another one is they're not very familiar with the growing region, because if it's labeled by place, you just see the place and that's it. And I have to admit, the third reason why is because if you can't pronounce it, you don't want to appear stupid or silly or whatever. And so that way, if you don't feel comfortable pronouncing it, you might not buy it and put it in your cart.
And this is common among wine drinkers. Some wine drinkers will have their thing, right, and not often stretch out. It's so true. And, I was speaking to a friend of mine the other day, and she called me. We were catching up, and she says, "I need some wine advice." And she loves California Chardonnay and Cabernet Sauvignon. And she's experimented with Chardonnay and Cabernet Sauvignon from around the world. But she's in a funk. And she said, "I need you to recommend some new wines for me to try." And I said right off the bat, you need to try a Douro Red. And that's a red blend from the Douro Valley, not fortified like port, but it's rich, it's full-bodied, and it costs between $15 and $22 a bottle. And she tried it and was like, "Wow, this is great," but she wasn't familiar with Portuguese wines. And so she didn't necessarily walk down that aisle because she wasn't knowledgeable about the area. So in getting the wines ready for the tasting, I had trouble finding Schioppettino in Ithaca. No surprise there, right? And another bottle that eluded me was Baga, right? So we have a couple substitutes, wine-adjacent related wines that we're going to taste here.
Yes.
But let's start with Schioppettino. Tell me about your experience. Why did that hit my list? And why was I unable to find it?
Why was I so excited about this obscure grape variety from Friuli in northeastern Italy? I discovered that grape variety when I was in Italy. I was there in Friuli for an importing trip, and we were at a winery, and I tried this red wine. I said, "Oh my gosh, this wine is amazing." It had spice, it had body, it had acidity. All I wanted to do was eat food with it. And the winemaker looked at me and said, "Well, I'm glad you liked it, but unfortunately I had to uproot or replant half of his vineyard because it wasn't selling on the market." I was like, okay, I need to get this wine. So immediately when I came back to California, I bought some Schioppettino, not from that same producer because it wasn't distributed in my area. But I really tried to get the word out, because that's the important thing about these grape varieties is you have to step outside of your comfort zone sometimes. But when you do, it can be really rewarding.
And this is part of the history of wine. You have to deal with market realities as a producer, right? And so in this case, was he planting Merlot? Is that what you said?
He was planting Merlot because Merlot at the time was selling. This is around sideways. And so Merlot was selling and not selling at the same time.
Yeah.
But Merlot is a very popular grape across the board.
Okay, let's go back to the cult wines.
Yes.
Alexakis Assyrtiko. This is a Greek wine. This is from Crete. What do we know about this? We're going to be tasting this one in a second.
Assyrtiko is a white grape variety that we associate with Greece. While it is being grown now in Australia and experimented in some other parts of the world, its home is Greece. And we associate it most with the island of Santorini. And shall we taste it?
Yes, let's do it. Yeah, of course.
So if we look at the color, I mean, the color is that pale straw, something that we associate with most white wines. But when you smell it, you get this really intense lime, but you also get a little bit of saltiness, almost like the salted rim on a margarita.
You're right.
And it's because of the soil and the proximity to the sea.
Yeah.
That the grapes are grown. And I love the intensity of the nose, but let's taste it. And I think what's on the palate, it's going to be beautiful. If you notice, the wine is bone dry.
It sure is.
And I know there's a huge conversation about minerality in wine, but it's as if you're licking a rock.
I was going to say a white stone.
Yes. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And it's just, you're salivating and you want food. Like you need to have a bite of food with this. Of course, people say, well, pair it with seafood. Yes, but I mean, you could pair it with anything. And it's just beautiful.
So for listeners, fill in the blank for me here. I like blank, so I will probably like Assyrtiko. What would it compare to if you had to?
I like Albarino.
Okay.
I like Vinho Verde. I like...
Fruitier than this.
A little bit.
Yeah,
a little bit. But also Trocken or dry Rieslings would be, again, because we're looking at the acidity level. And this wine is aromatic. Those other grape varieties also have beautiful aromatics. Or if you like, dry, high-acid Pinot Gris, Pinot Grigios as well.
Perfect. Okay, so that's our Assyrtiko. Lovely. I think it's really cool. It's very unique. It's a standout.
It is, and it's reasonably priced.
$15 for this bottle.
And this is from the island of Crete, and it's from a regional designation, a PGI. But if you were to go to the island of Santorini, it would specifically say PDO, Santorini. And if you are, if the winemaker uses oak, traditionally, this is a stainless steel, no oaked wine, but if they do use oak, they have to list it on the label, which can give you some confidence when buying the bottle.
The Alexakis brothers use ancient wine presses that have survived since the Bronze Age.
The history of wine, grape growing in Greece is incredible. And I think Greek wines, we're starting to see them much more on the market. People are understanding them a lot more, and they're not afraid to experiment.
Yeah, we'll talk about Retsina at some other date, but that's something that's starting to appear on shelves and mixed reviews.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. One of our other wines that we're not going to be tasting today, another one that I drove all over town trying to locate. I didn't succeed in finding Baga. What is Baga?
Baga is a red grape variety that we associate with the Dow and Bairrada.
Where's that?
In Portugal.
Okay.
And it's a thin berry that has a very, very thick skin. So it's a red grape. And often, historically speaking, rich tannic red wines. But what we're seeing now is that winemakers are experimenting. They're doing some carbonic maceration, which we've talked about before, but lessening the tannin in the wine, really juicy, fruit-forward expressions, and amazing.
Some of the notes are saying through that process, getting us closer to something like a Pinot Noir or Nebbiolo, something a little more, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it has the high acid. It would not be as high in tannin as a Nebbiolo.
Okay.
But if it has with the carbonic maceration, so that's why the tannin level would be much more similar to a Pinot Noir.
And Bagas can range in hue, white to rosé, every shade of red.
Exactly.
You can do all kinds of things with it. Versatile.
You can buy the bottle and drink it young, or they do have the opportunity to age as well.
So we have, I don't know if it's fair to say, a Baga adjacent wine in Bobal, but that's the direction you pointed me in the other day. I called you and said, Baga's not turning up. What are we going to do? So I found some Bobal. This one's called Kiki and Juan Vino Tinto. $18 a liter.
A liter for 33.8 ounces.
When it was handed to me by my wine seller, she said, this is totally crushable, which means it's cheap. Mm-hmm. Probably won't need to age it.
Yep.
Just go for it.
Exactly.
Right. Okay. Tell us what you know about Bobal.
So I love Bobal because we associate it with the Mediterranean coast, but a little bit more inland. So this is the western part of Valencia, UTL Requena, and these have higher elevations, and so you have tannin, but you also have acid. And I'm not going to tell you any more until you try this wine. Because
you've been wringing your hands in a sinister kind of way, waiting for me to taste this because I don't know that I've had a Bobal.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And
okay.
We're going to taste it, and then let's talk about it.
Okay.
So, look at the color. It's that purple hue, but you can still read through it, right? It's not opaque in nature.
It's kind of got, maybe I'm mistaken, I'm looking at it over a piece of paper, but it's got sort of that brown kind of thing going on that you would typically see with maybe an aged wine. Am I seeing that or not? I don't know.
I get more of that deep, rich purple hue.
Really cool. Okay.
And then if you smell it, it's the red and purple flowers, but like beautiful spice, kind of a rosemary, not green, like underripe spice, but just there's an intensity in the nose, and it smells like juicy fruit, ripe, juicy fruit. Woo! Salivating.
That's cool.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
It's just delicious. You have the acid, but you have the tannin, and there's like struggle, going at it in your mouth, just saying which is going to win, and then it finishes beautifully in balance of the tannin and the acid, and it's bright. And again, you want food with it, but you can also drink it on its own. And think about it. Put a little bit of a chill on it in the summertime.
I would.
As your wine seller mentioned, it's crushable.
Yeah, this is really something. I think settling into it, it's a little shocking at first, but settling into it, glass number 2, wow, probably great.
Yes, and Bobal the production is not huge, and that's one of the reasons why we don't see it dominate the Spanish wine shelves in your local retailer, because you have Tempranillo and Garnacha and the other red wine producing areas farther north. Much more dominant on the shelves.
This one's 90% Bobal, 8% Tempranillo, 2% Macabeo.
Which is a white grape.
Great.
And they're allowed to do that in the DO.
Okay, there we go. Kiki and Juan Vino Tinto, $18 a liter. I'm going to take another sip of this one. Really cool.
It just, on your mouth, it's like, wow. It's so exciting.
It's got it all. Totally crushable. Okay, let's move on.
Okay.
Our third tasting wine that we're going to hit today is this one is from Raul Perez, Spain. Switch out the bottles here. Tell us a little bit about what you know about this wine here.
This is a Mencia grape variety, and it's from the region of Bierzo. Bierzo gets oftentimes lumped into that green Spain, that northwestern corner, but it's in the western part of Castilla y León. And Mencia, it benefits from some elevation, diurnal temperature fluctuations between highs and lows, and it's a grape variety that I discovered about 20 years ago. And I tried it once. I was like, wow, this is really cool. And the chef that I was working with at the time really loved to experiment with food, and oftentimes, his flavors, he would like bold flavors but not overpowering, and I would just say Mencia. Let's go with the Mencia on the pairing menu for the evening.
So tell us a little bit about Raul Perez, the winemaker here. Interesting guy.
So he is inspiring the next generation of Spanish winemakers because he is a visionary, forward-thinking, bringing back grape varieties and regions that were forgotten about. Exactly, into the mainstream.
Great, good. Okay, there we go. So the grapes we're dealing with, just straight up Mencia grape here, right? Yes?
No,
Mencia.
this actually has a little bit of Alicante Bouschet.
Oh, there we go.
As well as Bastardo, which is also known as Trousseau. So for those of you that enjoy wines from the Gers region in France, we associate Trousseau with that region.
Great.
But Alicante Bouschet is also grown in California. And it's interesting because that grape variety has the pulp is actually colored. So it's a unique family of grapes, part of a unique family of grapes.
Okay, this one differentiates itself a little bit. The price tag, a whole different deal. We're at $35 plus in the U.S.
And that's part of the reason Raul Perez, this is his upper echelon, part of his upper echelon portfolio.
Yep.
And also it is a higher tiered Mencia.
Yeah.
And so that's why you can find various price points coming from Bierzo.
Okay, any notes on this as we smell through it? Wow.
To me, cherry cola. It has this like spicy cherry cola note. If you look at the wine actually is more opaque. It has a richer color intensity to it. And so we see that and it's like, oh, wow, this wine, our perceptions are already kind of going through our mind. But when you taste it, again, very well balanced, greeted with that bright acidity. Tannin level is present, but it's very well in balance with the acid level. So one is not overpowering the other. And it's different than the Bobal, right? Because the Bobal kind of came in and went, wow. And this one comes in and goes, and just that beautiful simmer on the palate. The texture is a little bit more creamy and coating. Yeah,
a pretty wine. These are all relatively in the same ballpark as far as dryness goes. Do any of these have a ticket to the big time? I don't know. I mean...
Well, I think one of the biggest limitations is there's not a huge amount of land mass.
I know that Perez is increasing his by several thousand hectares every year in order to meet increasing demand, but
that takes 5 to 7 years before they can, sell the grapes or use the grapes to make wine.
Right.
And you're also planting on hillside. And when you're planting on hillside, you can't, while you're increasing in hectares or acres, the vine density is still fairly wide apart.
So a couple of these, you are author of the Wines of Spain and Portugal certificate. Do you cover any of these within the certificate, or what kind of grape varieties do you typically... I don't know.
We do, because of how the country is mapped out in areas within. We have wonderful tools that you can actually take to the wine store that describes the grape variety and some of the flavors that are associated with a wine made from that grape and where you would find them, because oftentimes the grape variety is not listed on the label, so you would have to know the place.
Very good. So we'll share the URL for that in the chat for those of you who are viewing with us today. Cheryl, in past keynotes, we've often devoted the last couple of minutes to a segment we call What Did You Bring? Which is about you bringing something and then telling us about it. Typically, I match it with something of my own, but we're going to give this thing top billing all on its own. You brought a book. This is a reference guide.
I brought a book called Wine Grapes.
Yeah.
And it is, as Chris, when you lifted it up, it's very heavy. It's a very large book, but I use it as a reference when in teaching, in writing material, and just learning about grapes grown throughout the world. And Jancis Robinson, along with 2 other researchers, Jancis Robinson, a master of wine from the United Kingdom, wrote this amazing book that goes through grape varieties through DNA and, matching up, okay, it's grown in this country under this name and it's grown in this country or neighboring region under this name. And you can link them together.
A pricey book at $175, exhaustive, and what we were talking about, this is effectively kind of like a permanent legacy kind of thing for Jancis Robinson.
Yes.
This will be, excuse me, published in some incarnation from here on out, probably.
Well, and it took years to write it and do all of the research, but really the time and energy and level of detail they took is incredible, absolutely incredible, with family trees as well of these different grape varieties and ampelography. It is an incredible book.
Perfect. And the wines that we've drank today, we had Assyrtiko, we had a Bobal, and we had a Mencia.
Yes,
it was a great tasting. Cheryl, thank you so much for joining us today in the Wine Club podcast.
Thank you so much, Chris.
Thanks, audience. We'll see you next time.